Okay then, brethren, for the past few weeks we've been talking about the subject of the heart of man. And last week we moved to an associated topic, which was the heart and mouth connection. And hopefully we saw there that the heart influences what comes out of our mouth, our words. So there is quite a strong link between the heart of man and the words he speaks. And it's quite an important topic in a number of ways, because surely God is very interested in what's in our heart, the state of our heart, and God will be very interested in the words we speak, what we're saying. So the connection, the heart and mouth connection, is really a key indicator for God as to quite how we're doing. And today I want to take it a little bit further and look at the topic of words a little bit more, the heart and mouth connection, but just looking at the word part of that in a little more detail. And if you think about those times when you're trying to evaluate yourself, how am I doing as a Christian? If you do that, of course. I'm assuming that from time to time we all might do that. Just think, wonder how I'm actually faring as a believer. And actually in some areas it's quite nebulous, quite difficult to be really concrete. Am I a humble person? Am I a person of integrity? Do I compromise in some areas? Am I complacent about my calling? The feeling you get is it's quite an important question, but a bit hard to actually see how I can easily answer those questions. However, when it comes to our words, what we're saying, that's a bit more doable. That's much more practical, because all of us, at least most of us, I guess, do talk. Every day we're using words, right? Now, some people speak more than others. Some people are motor mouths, and some people don't speak perhaps a great deal at all. But over a period of time, nearly all of us are speaking words and more words and more words. So it's much easier to monitor our words, our speaking, our conversations, what we're saying to others or what we're saying to ourselves. It's a lot more practical, a lot easier than, say, trying to figure out whether you're a complacent person, or not. And if we monitor our words, we may discover that some of these aren't too good, really. Gives us a chance to sort of make some adjustments and can even help us to grow. And the scriptures, as we'll see again today, make it very plain, plainly plain, that our words are very, very important. And we shouldn't dismiss them as, what's he on about now? Words are important. Let's look at Proverbs 18 and 21 for our first scripture today. Proverbs 18 and 21. We have been here perhaps last week. Proverbs 18 and 21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Okay, book of Proverbs, I guess Solomon explaining here something that he's observed many times in his wise life. And he says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Now, that means life and death. It's a life and death situation. Now, most of us recognize if I'm in a life and death situation, that's deadly serious because death is involved, right? And here it says death and life. That does sound sort of fairly important, doesn't it? Death and life and death are in the power of the tongue. So we're talking about words. And those who love it will eat its fruit. So that suggests to me that the power of the tongue, our words, is quite serious, what they can do. Even more so if we're not paying any attention to them. Death and life and death. The Septuagint translation gives it pretty much the same, but just a slight difference. Life and death are in the power of the tongue, and they that rule it shall eat the fruits thereof. They that rule it. So it certainly suggests there in the Septuagint version that you and I should be striving to rule our tongue, So not just blabbing left, right, and centre, saying any old thing, whatever springs to our mind, just let it rip. No, those who rule it, who control, who muzzle, who bridle the tongue, will be better off than those who just let whatever's in their heart just race out and cause all manner of who knows what problems, but potentially life and death. So quite serious. Let's turn to Matthew 12, see what Jesus had to say, and I believe we were here last week. So Matthew 12, starting with verses 36 to 37. And Jesus has been having a bit of a debate with the Pharisees, been accusing him of all manner of things. Verse 36, "But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." Well, again, I'd say that suggests that words are quite important. You'll be justified or condemned, what, by my words? And verse 36, "For every idle word, every worthless or careless word that men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment." So at least some people are going to arrive at the day of judgment before the judge, and the words, or at least the idle words, the worthless words, the careless words that they spoke, Jesus says they're going to have to give account of that. They're going to have to explain that. They're going to have to talk, because Jesus is the judge, they're going to have to talk me through those words, what they said there and there and there. And then they'll be justified or condemned, by their words. So that, again, tells me that our words, what we say from our hearts, are important. Why are they important? Well, look at verses 33 to 35. Just going back a little bit. "Either make the tree good and its fruit good," which would be typically true, "or else make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit." And Jesus is talking about those who eat the fruits, right? The fruits of the tongue. Verse 34, "Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The surplus, the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. The heart and mouth connection that we covered last week. That's a general principle, because verse 35 tells us a good man, out of the good treasure of his heart, brings forth good things, obviously the words. And an evil man, out of the evil treasure, brings forth evil things. So whether it's good or whether it's bad, good heart, bad heart brings out appropriate words. If it's an evil tree, it will produce evil fruit. If it's a good tree, it will produce, good. So the heart and mouth connection. So therefore, Jesus can say, by your words you'll be justified, by your words be condemned, because your words actually will reveal, in many cases at least, a great deal of what's in your heart. And certainly God the Father and Jesus are concerned about what's in our hearts. Turn to Psalms 15, and we'll read verses 1 to 5, which is actually the entire psalm. So Psalms 15. Verse 1, "Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill?" I think ultimately that's talking about, God's kingdom, the heavenly temple, and so on. So who may live there? Who's the person who's going to end up abiding with you, dwelling with you, living with you in your kingdom? Who? Well, the answer is he who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. Somebody who speaks what's in their heart. In this case, speaks the truth that's in his heart. So the heart has an abundance of truth, and they speak the truth. Their words show you what's in their heart. But he who does not backbite with his tongue, again, words, the power of the tongue. He who does not backbite with his tongue. So that's one of the ingredients, so to speak, that David says belongs to the person who will dwell with God. They won't be a person who has a backbiting tongue, a sharp tongue, a cutting tongue. Nor does evil to his neighbour, nor does he take up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, but he honours those who fear the Lord. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. Well, that's quite good. You swear, you make a formal statement of some sort, perhaps a promise, and it turns out, oops, that wasn't so clever, but it says he swears to his own hurt and does not change. He's given his word. She's given her word. Somebody's depending on it. It's important. And that person, even though they realize after the event that I'm committed now, I wonder if I can wriggle out. I wonder if I can be ill that day. Perhaps the dog has a nasty attack of diarrhea and can't make it out of the house, right? Well, the answer is no. Swears even to his own hurt and will not change. Said it. I'm committed to it. I will do it. In fact, the London Stock Exchange, its motto is, my word is my bond. My word is my bond. That's it. If I said it, it's for sure. So certainly back in the olden days, the 1800s and so on, they wouldn't even always have documentation. If you said, well, I'll buy that stock there for £1 million, will you? Yes, I will. Okay. Is that agreed? It's agreed. That's done. You don't need pages and pages of documents, because my word is my bond. At least that's, I guess, what the list aimed for. I'm sure there are a few fraudulent people here and there. And of course, if their words were their bond, in a sense it showed that the heart was a heart of integrity. They were honest, people of integrity. When I say it, you can count on it. I swear to my own hurt. That's quite a good example, really. And again, shows the importance of words, actually, of course, thinking what we're saying before we say them. Getting back to Psalms 15, just finishing off verse 5. He who does not put out his money at usury, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent, he who does these things shall never be moved. So it's a fairly good illustration there of the person who's going to end up enjoying life in God's heavenly kingdom is a person, amongst other things, speaks the truth, doesn't backbite, swears, if necessary, to his or her own hurt, and does a few other things. And like it says there, my word is my bond. For sure, God's word is his bond, right? God gives his word. We can go to the bank on that. Question for you and me might be, is my word my bond? Occasionally we make mishaps and say things and have to sort of retreat slightly. But on the other hand, in normal times, are we fully committed to our words? Do we say things and so on? And are we honest? And can people count on your word? Or do you ever go back on it? Maybe sometimes you have to phone up and say, I apologize, I said this, I'm terribly embarrassed, but I'm unable to fulfill, etc., etc. But that shouldn't be something that we're having to do too often. Our words should be dependable and reliable. Now look at Psalms 34, whilst we're in the book of Psalms. Psalms 34, we read verses 8 to 15. I think a thunderstorm has just arrived. Hailstones as well, apparently, I'm told. So hope the internet stays up for a little bit longer at least. Psalms 34, verses 8 through 15. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who trusts in him. O fear the Lord, you his saints. There is no want, no lack, to those who fear him. The young lions lack and suffer hunger, but those who seek the Lord shall not lack any good thing. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Verse 12. Who is the man who desires life and loves many days that he may see good? That sounds like probably most of us would be sort of thinking, yeah, probably, yeah, me. You know, who is the man or who is the woman who desires life, loves the idea of many days, especially that they may see good in those days? Well, that sounds like a pretty attractive objective. Loving life and looking forward to many days to see good things happen. Well, the answer is the person who will see that. Who is the man? Who is the woman? Here's the answer. Verse 13, or here's what you need to be doing. Verse 13, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking guile or deceit. So the first thing he mentions, there'll be a few other things, of course, that one would need to do to be able to show a desire for a life and a long life at that. But the first thing that's mentioned, strangely enough, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking guile. Because that's something that you and I are doing all day long, right? We don't have to go out the house necessarily. You could use the phone. I mean, if you're living on your own, talking to yourself might demonstrate a problem. But you know what I mean. Most of us have got plenty of opportunities over the course of a week or two to speak, to use words. So it gives us plenty of opportunity to just, what are my words like? What do they tell about me? It's always carping and critical and negative and so on, or are they words that tend to be encouraging and positive and optimistic? What do my words tell about me as a person? From the overflow of my heart, what's coming out of my mouth, right? And how we, of course, relate to other people with our words is also, part of this equation, very important. But anyway, the first thing he mentions, this is a Psalm of David, is keep your tongue from evil. Guard your tongue. Verse 14, depart from evil, of course, and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. And I guess all of us would like to think that God's watching us, being watchful over us, and that his ears are open for our cry of help. And we do that, amongst other things, by keeping our tongue from evil and our lips from speaking, guile. It's quite important, the tongue. That's why, we'll be judged to some extent by our words, right? The Net translation of verse 12 says, do you want to really live? Would you love to live a long, happy life? Then make sure you don't speak evil words or use deceptive speech. So if you really want to live, if you want to really live, if you love to live a long, happy life, then that apparently is the answer. Let's look at Psalms 39, since we're in Psalms still. Psalms 39. And we'll read verses 1 through 5. Again, a Psalm of David, he says, I've said, I will guard my ways, lest I sin with my tongue. I will restrain my mouth with a muzzle, while the wicked are before me. So, I will guard my ways, lest I sin with my mouth. Can we sin with our mouths? Looks like it. And what comes out of our mouths? Words. So David, another Psalm of David here, he's a bit concerned. He's got to guard himself and be very careful, lest he knows that he might sin with his mouth by saying things which will not be pleasing to God. There might be harmful words, right? Especially if there's provocation around you, like he says, while the wicked are before me. Some situations in life, we're just casual conversation or not under any pressure. Our words can be light and airy and all the rest of it. But when pressure's on, when stressful times come upon us, and they will, and they do, right? When you're under pressure, suddenly sometimes things can come out that we might regret and think afterwards, oops. But of course, what does that tell us about our heart, right? So here David says, when there's the wicked around him, under pressure, people are trying to provoke him and so on, he has to be careful to guard his lips, lest he sins with his tongue. Let's carry on. I was mute with silence. I held my peace even from good, and my sorrow was stirred up. My heart was hot within me. While I was musing or reflecting, the fire burned, and then I spoke with my tongue. So even again, here you can see the heart and mouth connection. David's trying to control his mouth, lest he sins with his lips. But as he looks at the situation around him, the wicked, the provocation, the stressful situation, what does he say? His heart starts to heat up. My heart is hot within me. The fire burned, and then he couldn't keep it in any longer. And of course, that's not uncommon. As our heart builds up a head of steam, the fires blaze, and then it is got to say it because of the intense heart and mouth connection. And of course, at times like that, you need to be very careful what you're saying. Because when your heart's hot and burning and the fire's there, the steam's blowing out, pressure's on, be careful what you say at that time. Thankfully, in David's case, moving on to verses 4 and 5, he says, Then I spoke with my tongue, Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am. Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age is as nothing before you. Certainly every man at his best state is but vapor. Selah. So at least thankfully in the case there, David, when his heart was about to explode, at least he talked to God. He didn't speak nonsense to people and start to use curse words and so on. You know, David was very careful there, but he was guarding the point is he's guarding his mouth, lest he sins with his mouth. And that's something we need to be aware of. Again, you can see there the heart and mouth connection, and when the heart is very hot, it could be okay to speak to God with some care, but be careful speaking to other people. They're not usually quite as forgiving as God is. So we're in Proverbs and Psalms here. Let's turn to Proverbs chapter 29. So Psalms, and then after that comes the book of Proverbs, chapter 29 and verse 20. I think we may have read this before, Proverbs 29 and verse 20. Do you see a man, or woman of course, hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for that person. A man or woman who are hasty in his words, they're rash. They're not thinking, they're not reflecting, they're not filtering. It just pours out. And we've said before, you need to be very careful about our words. I mean, this is one of those cases where at times what's better than rash words, hasty words from a hasty heart, is sometimes the vocabulary of silence. Say nothing. That sometimes is the better answer. I mean, sometimes people will come to us and recount and share their problems and difficulties and so on, and it's very easy for us to sort of, that's no problem. Now, let me tell you the answer here. This is what you should do, and we come up with our brilliant solutions, which of course might be stupid and just unwise, but we're just in such a hurry. We're so hasty to speak. A man who's hastening his words, I mean, the person who's talking to us might simply want a little bit of comfort, a listening ear with whom they can share, some of their difficulties and some of their feelings. They may not necessarily want your super duper brilliant answer as to, well, if I was in your situation, this is what I would do. Well, actually, you might not if you're in their situation with their particular difficulties. So be a bit careful about, hasty speech. Like I said last week, before we say something, there are really three gates through which our words should come. We should be asking ourselves, is it true? What I'm about to say, is it true? Even if it is, that's not the end of the story. Is it necessary to say this? Is it kind? And depending on what you get back from those little questions, the vocabulary of silence might be better than foolish words pouring out from a hasty heart, because a hasty heart can cause a lot of problems. We're in Proverbs. Look at Proverbs 15 and verse 4. Proverbs chapter 15. I'm talking hasty words there. It reminds me of a well-known businessman here in this country a number of years back, a guy called Gerald Ratner. Gerald Ratner at the time was a very he was a millionaire, probably a multi-millionaire, and he had a whole chain of jewelry stores around Britain, like hundreds of them. Every high street in every properly sized town had a Ratner's jewelry store.
Good jewellers.
And it was popular. It made pots of money. It'd been in the high street for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 years. I think the guy inherited it from his father, built it up, so quite a big chain. And he was a well-known businessman, and he lived the high life, fast cars, fast women, all that sort of stuff. And he was at a business directors meeting, an Institute of Directors, I think it was. So it was a full-blown business meeting with lots of directors from other companies, and he was up there as a sort of I guess one of the lead speakers. And in the audience were journalists, because it was a quite important business meeting. And he was asked a question like, how can you sell, a decanter, a crystal decanter, for such a cheap price? And he said, well, we can sell it at such a cheap price because it's complete crap. Right? And that was a hasty word. If he thought that through, he wouldn't have said that. Then he carried on something like, you can buy a pair of earrings in our shops for cheaper than a Marks and Spencer's salmon sandwich. And the sandwich will probably last longer. And he said that a few seconds later. And of course, the journalist just thought, what do you say? So the next day, all the headlines and lots of the newspapers on the BBC and so on, Ratner says their jewellery is crap, which he did say. No, he was only joking, I think. It was a hasty word under this pressure to be jovial and funny in public and all that stuff. But of course, Ratner says no more.
No.
Because,
It wasn't very long after that, no.
I mean, it lost about 500 million the first week after that, and it never ended. Because think about it, what a young man is going to select for his lady friend a pair of earrings from Ratner's, giving a fancy gift box to her. She's going to say, "Oh, that crap," So good illustration of how death and life are in the power of the tongue. Those were his words. I'm not using bad words for the sake of it. Those were his words, and that's the words that was in the headlines of the papers and the news reports immediately.
He lost 500 million.
Ton of money disappeared. The company, I think, disappeared. It might have been renamed since then, because you wouldn't want to know that your jewellery was from Ratner's, right? Where were we?
Actually, 2,000.
Proverbs 15:4. Was that where we were going? Yeah, Proverbs 15:4. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in the tongue, breaks the spirit. A wholesome tongue, so other translations say a gentle tongue or a soothing tongue, is a tree of life. It's encouraging. It builds up. It helps. But a perverse tongue, a sort of twisted, bitter tongue, breaks the spirit. And that most of us probably know of situations or have read in articles and so on about, maybe you're one of them for all I know, but people who perhaps as children, their father or mother said some very harsh things to them. And unfortunately, some people are quite, sensitive, and so some harsh things said to them as young children, it can affect them for the rest of their lives. Well, you're good for nothing. You're a complete dolt. I don't know why we had you. I always wanted a girl, didn't want another son. I don't want you. You'll be a complete failure in life. You take after your ex. relative. People have said that to kids, perhaps in the heat of the moment, but of course sometimes, children, if they're sensitive in particular, will hear that, and those words will be so cutting that the scars will never heal. And even when they're 40, 50 years old, they'll still feel insecure, like they'll never amount to anything because they were told forcibly, by a parent or perhaps a teacher or something, you're no good. Waste of space. Don't know why you were even born. I wish you'd never been born. Now, I think that's happened multiple times, and you may know an example of that, or you might even be an example of that. And even 30, 40 years later, when that person is married and got their own children, their security, their self-esteem, their comfort will always be impacted, by perverseness in a tongue that breaks the spirit, which is what I think Solomon's on about there. But you and I should be people who've got a wholesome tongue. A tree of life. It brings life into things, right? The scriptures themselves show lots of illustrations of perverse tongues and wholesome tongues and good use of words and poor use of words. So we'll look at a few of them now. Let's start in Numbers chapter 13. Book of Numbers and 13. The stories of ancient Israel, always good for lots of lessons. So 13, beginning in verses 27 and 28. So the 12 spies had been into the promised land, having to survey it, bring back a report to Moses and the rest of Israel, pick up the story here in verse, 27. They just come back. Then they told Moses and said, "We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Well, that sounds good. Wow, it's like, wow, it is a land of milk and honey. Wow, let's go. Nevertheless, here starts the problem. And nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, can you believe it? We saw the descendants of Anak there. And of course, everybody knows the descendants of Anak, they are big guys, right? They are nasty dudes. You don't want to meet the sons of Anak anywhere, right?
Not if you can help it.
And dropping down to verse 3. So they basically started fear, anxiety, because we can't do it. I mean, we can't do it. How can you do it? The cities are big, they're fortified, there's big, strong guys there. They kill us easily, without their mercy. Verse 30, Caleb, one of the two good spies, quieted the people before Moses and said, so we're talking about words, the words of the bad spies. They were just words, just what we're saying. Just our view, our opinion. Verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. Here's a man whose words were positive and optimistic and, of course, faith-filled, unlike the bad spies who clearly had apparently zero faith in God. We can't do it. These big guys over there. The sons of Anak. Have you seen these characters? Ooh, no way. And, well, we can't do that. Excuse me, guys, what happened to Jehovah God that just destroyed Egypt and brought you through the wilderness and through the Red Sea? Has he disappeared or something? But all they could see was the physical. Verse 31. But the men who had gone up with Caleb said, we are not able to go up against the people. They're stronger than we are. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, or the Nephilim. The descendants of Anak come from the giants. And the sons of Anak, no, sorry, they're big, brutal, burly sorts. We can't manage. We're, as it says, we were like wimps in our own sight, and so we were in their sight, like grasshoppers. They're going to stamp all over us. Hopeless. We've had it. And you could say, well, but you can see here the problem, can't you? These are words, right? But didn't Proverbs tell us that death and life are in the power of the tongue? So here are these guys flapping their tongues. Caleb saying, let's go. And what if they'd gone? Wow, saved 40 years, saved maybe 2 million people from dying, at least in that time period, right? Or these guys with their bad words, their perverse words. You see, words convey a message, don't they? It's not just words. Words convey a message. And the message from the heart of these men was, we're sunk. The message from the heart of Caleb was, let's go, we can do it. And of course, the words convey hope or fear, which leads to action. And the action you take can lead to life or death, right? Let's continue on in verses 1 to 4 of chapter 14. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. So you can see who they're believing, can't you? And all the children of Israel murmured, with your words, of course, you'd do that, against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them with their words, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Now, do you think that was sensible? Knowing what we know about the heart and mouth connection and the death and life are in the power of the tongue, does it make sense to say to God, well, to Moses, but it was God really, if only we had been lucky enough to die in this wilderness? Well, guess what, guys and gals? You said it. It's on the way. Verse 3. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, okay, that's it. We'll find a new leader and back to Egypt we're going. Right? If only we had died in this wilderness. I mean, we've said, is that a question of being hasty in your words? Like Proverbs 15 said, don't be hasty in your words. Right? And consider here, these are rash words, aren't they? These are foolish words, if you'd even thought about it for a moment. But it is another example to us that death and life are in the power of the tongue. It shows us again the heart and mouth connection, because when they're saying these words, what does that show you about the heart? What does that tell you? Could you guess what the heart of these Israelites was like from their words? You can't see them. You can't see the people, right? You don't know their names, their ages, what their skills were. But you can hear their words, and those words tell you and tell me that their heart was in a very bad place. They were fearful. They had no trust in God. They believed the worst was about to happen. They said it with their mouth, and lo and behold, they got it. Really, really not wise at all. Look at verses 26 to 30. We'll just finish off their tale. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who murmur, with the words, against me? I have heard the murmurings which the children of Israel murmur against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken, just as you have spoken, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. You said it, I heard it, I know that's what's in your heart, and you know what, guys? You're going to get exactly what you said. So I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have murmured against me shall fall in this wilderness. All of you who were numbered, according to your entire number, from 20 years old and above, which is probably not far off 2 million, 1.5 million, something like that, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in, because, well, I can't. I mean, God had given up at that point. 10 times they'd provoked him. I think we know about that. So they'd pronounced here their own death sentence, didn't they? Well, I wish we'd died in this wilderness. Oops. Don't do that. Don't say that. I remember Ecclesiastes, we're not turning there, but chapter 5, verse 2, we saw it last week. Don't be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. Remember that? Don't be rash with your mouth. Let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. Don't do it. Vocabulary of silence, far better. Again, earlier in the book of Ecclesiastes, it says that there's a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. But the silence comes first, right? A time to keep silence, a time to speak. Silence can be quite important, especially if you're about to drop yourself in it big time with rash lips. Another example we can find in Genesis 27, story of Isaac and Jacob and Esau. So we're in Genesis 27. Beginning in verse 1. Now it came to pass when Isaac was old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, My son. He answered him, Here I am. It says Esau was his oldest son. Esau and Jacob were, of course, twins. So Esau was only a minute or two older than Jacob. If you remember the story, Esau came out sort of first. Well, actually, it's quite an interesting story, isn't it? Because even in the womb, they struggled. It says they're struggling in the womb. So when Esau was born, he was born with Jacob's hand around his heel. So trying to pull him back to anchor out first. I want to be the firstborn. Obviously, you can't really do that as a 1-day-old baby or a 1-minute-old baby, but that's the impression you got. So they actually named Jacob
Supplanter.
because that means supplanter or deceiver. A supplanter is probably a good term for it, right? So it says Esau's oldest son. He's only older by a minute, but he was the firstborn, so legally, technically, he gets the goodies. And he said, Behold now, says Isaac, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. It actually turned out to be about 43 years later. So he lives a long time after this, but he could well have been unwell at this time and thinking his days were numbered. He said, Behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore, please take your weapons, your quiver, your bow, go out to the field and hunt game for me. Make me savoury food such as I love and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. Well, that was nearly 50 years later, but he probably was quite unwell at the time. That might also have affected his eyesight a bit there. He obviously recovered because he lived for 43 more years. But anyway, the story is he thinks about to die, and so very quickly make sure this super blessing. And what's that? It's what he's going to speak with his words, his mouth. He wants to speak formal words to give a formal blessing to his son. So it's quite evident that Isaac here believes his words are words of life, will be words of life. Must be because he wants to carry out this ceremony so very quickly where he can speak powerful, important words that will affect the life of his firstborn Esau. He believes his words are important. Well, guess what? So does Rebecca and Jacob, because obviously Rebecca overhears, doesn't she? And she thinks, oh, he's going to speak words to Esau. I want him to speak those words to my favoured son, Jacob, because she believed that those words, once communicated, would change the life of the person. And obviously Jacob must have felt the same because he went through with the ruse, which was to sort of dress up as his brother, put on animal skins to smell like Esau would partly smell, right? Now, so these people here believed that words were important, that death and life was in the power of the tongue. I mean, do we really grasp that? So anyway, the game continues, verses 22 to 29. So Jacob, dressed up in these animal skins, went near to Isaac his father, and he, Isaac, felt him and said, But the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands, these animal skins, are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. Esau being a very hairy person, apparently. So he blessed him. Then he said, Are you really my son Esau? I am.
Uh-oh.
Somewhat of a liar, I think. And he said, well, bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you. So he brought it near to him, and Isaac ate, and he brought him wine, and Isaac drank. A lovely meal, just the way that Isaac likes it, because it was cooked by Rebekah, of course, who well knew how to prepare food that her husband liked. Then his father Isaac said to him, come near now and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of his clothing and blessed him and said, surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore, may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine. This is mega prosperity. May you prosper abundantly, boy. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Quite a statement to make. Isaac believes it's happening. Jacob will believe it's going to happen. Rebekah, for all I know, is listening around the corner. Oh, great. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. Curse is words. Obviously bad words, or words that are designed to bring you down and destroy you. Blessing is, again, words. So cursings and blessings, don't forget, are words, right? Of course, the story moves on slightly. Let's read verses 30 to 37. Then it happened, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out of the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also had made savory food, brought it to his father, and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may then bless me. His father Isaac said to him, who are you? He said, well, I'm your son, your firstborn, I'm Esau. Then Isaac trembled exceedingly, I think the penny was dropping, and said, who? Oh, where is the one who earlier hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I've blessed him. And indeed, he shall be blessed. So I don't think we fully understand how these words work, but obviously Isaac was utterly convinced that he'd given a blessing, even if it's to the wrong person. And it says here, dash, indeed, he shall be blessed. These words that I said will change his future. He will be blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. What about me? My scumbag brother's done this. Well, I'm going to kill him, which is, of course, what he planned to do. But he said, oh, well, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob, meaning supplanter, cheat? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright. Now look, he has taken away my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Then Isaac answered and said to Esau, indeed, I have made him your master, and all his brethren. I have given to him his servants with grain and wine. I have sustained him. What shall I now do for you, O my son? So what we see here is you can't take back your words sometimes. This was a formal, official, legal blessing. You can't take it back. It's only words, but you can't take them back. That's a principle for you and me. You know, we need to recognize on a personal level, sometimes when we say things, we can't take them back, can't erase them from existence. There's a saying that says, be careful with your words. Once they're said, they can only be forgiven, not forgotten, which, if you think about it, is potentially true. Be careful with your words. Once they're spoken, they can only be forgiven if they're harmful, but probably never forgotten. How many times under pressure people shout out, I hate you, I wish I'd never married you, or whatever, had you, right? And then when they cool down, they think, oh, didn't really mean to say that. It was just, upset and agitated and just came out. And they go along and say, oh, very sorry, didn't mean what I said. Please forgive me. And the person hopefully says, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, I'll forgive you. But to forget it, it's not so easy, is it? Because who knows how many years those comments might still be there. You know, the cutting comment that leaves a scar. Scar's still there. So your words might be forgiven, but perhaps cannot ever be forgotten. So be careful, what we say. Jesus, we see here in Mark 10, let's read verses 13 to 16. So there's an example of Isaac blessing, and Isaac clearly thinking his words would make a big impact, have a big impact. And Rebecca and Jacob, no doubt, felt the same. Well, look here in Mark chapter 10, because here Jesus blesses with his words. Then they brought young children to Jesus that he might touch them, but the disciples rebuked those who brought them. But when Jesus saw it, he was greatly displeased and said to them, let the little children come to me, guys. Do not forbid them, for of such is the kingdom of God. Assuredly, I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will by no means enter it. And Jesus took them up in his arms, the little children, put his hands on them, and blessed them. Jesus spoke good words over these little children, words of encouragement, words of protection, words of health, words of opportunity. Don't exactly know what he said, but he blessed them, meaning he spoke good words over them, over their lives. And this wasn't a platitude. I mean, Jesus doesn't speak idle words, does he? This wasn't some sort of like a photo opportunity, for the Capernaum Gazette. Oh, see with this child, take a photograph. Politicians do that sort of thing, kissing a baby, probably about to retch afterwards, but of course it's a photographic opportunity. With Jesus, this was real. He said good words over these children because he knew that saying good words would have a good effect, because Jesus knows that death and life are in the power of the tongue, and he's bringing life to these children with his tongue. Let's turn to Mark 11. We're in Mark, aren't we? Mark 11, verses 12 to 14. We know the story fairly well, so again I won't elaborate it. I can see the clock is running. But verses 12 through 14. Now the next day when they had come out from Bethany, Jesus was hungry. And seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. In response, Jesus said to it, let no one eat fruit of you ever again. And his disciples heard it. So Jesus spoke words, curse words in this case, in the proper sense. Jesus cursed the fig tree. A curse being, words which devote something to destruction. So Jesus devoted this fig tree to destruction with his words. A day later, verses 20 through 24. Now in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, remembering, said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed, which you devoted to destruction with your words, with the power of your tongue, has withered away. Jesus answered and said to them, well, that's because I'm the Son of God, and I can do glorious things, but not for you guys. It's sort of how most people seem to take this story. Well, yeah, that's what Jesus can do because he's the Son of God. Nothing to do with us as people, human beings, is it? Well, that's not what Jesus said. Have faith in God, for assuredly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, whoever, not just me, Jesus, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that those things he says will come to pass, he will have whatever he says. And well, maybe we'll stop there, I guess. So what Jesus is saying here is, whosoever believes in his heart and says with his mouth will have what he says with his mouth. So again, that's the heart and mouth connection, right? Very clearly expressed there. Now, of course, I think the teaching is actually quite clear. A mountain here, of course, I don't think Jesus means you can go around rearranging
Himalayas.
countryside in the Himalayas. You toss the Himalayas into the Indian Ocean or something. You can't. Well, I don't believe that's what he's on about. I think a mountain is figurative. It just means a situation, even a big, complex, difficult situation which you find insurmountable, which you can't deal with. A big, horrible situation in front of you. Speak to it and believe in your heart that it will do what you say, and speak to it and you'll have what you say. That's what you're saying. The teaching, I think, is fairly plain. Even if our minds, natural minds, sort of struggle to understand it and sort of do it. But nonetheless, the teaching is there. Heart and mouth connection, and your tongue is so powerful that you can even move a mountain. So we should be careful what we say, what we think and believe in our hearts, and what we say, because even if we say it negatively, it might bring things in rather than moving mountains away. Let's turn to Numbers chapter 20. Now the Israelites said, if only we died out here. That's what they believed in their heart. If only we died out here. And God was listening. I said, okay, you got it. Numbers 20. And let's read verses 2 to 8. Story of the Israelites yet again, of course. This time Moses being the offending party. Yeah, Moses. So say Numbers 20.
Verses 2 to 9.
Verse 2. Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together, surprise, surprise, against Moses and Aaron. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our animals should die here? Why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink, because still in the wilderness at this stage, although it's getting towards the end of the 40 years here. So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and they fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the assembly together, speak to the rock. Speak to the rock. You're going to speak to the rock. And Jesus just said, speak to the mountain. So it's not exactly dissimilar in some ways, is it? Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. So I guess rock, provide water for God's people, and it would have done so. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals. Unfortunately, I guess Moses at this stage was really at his wit's end. He'd been provoked so often himself, and I guess his patience had just run out, so things unfortunately go a bit wrong. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said to them, hear now, you rebels! Must we bring water for you out of this rock? Rash words. Rebels, well, of course they were, but they were also, God's people. And calling them rebels, I think, shows you the sort of mind that Moses. And he says, must we bring water? Actually, no, Moses. God's going to bring the water. So what he said is, he could have said, must Jehovah God bring water out of this rock for you? At least that way people understand it's, Jehovah. You focus on God. Not as here, must we, Aaron and me, must we do it for you? Then Moses lifted his rod and struck the rock twice. Didn't speak to it. And water came out abundantly, and the congregation, the animals, drank. And I guess a bit later, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. That was to both Moses and Aaron, so neither. And we know about Moses, and we all feel a bit sorry for Moses, all the good work he did and didn't get to go into the promised land and died and all the rest of it. But Aaron's included. It says you plural. If you got a King James, it'll say ye, right? Ye didn't believe me, and ye not gone in, so rather than thou. So they're both finished at this point. The story's going to end fairly soon. This was the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them. So, bit of an issue here. I mean, obviously, you know, Moses, I can understand and sympathize with Moses, I suppose. But notice verse 12 is interesting, because you did not believe me. So, I'm not quite sure what to read into that. Didn't believe God would do it by his words. Did he doubt that his words would be effective and think he had to use some sort of physical thing like the rod and bang on the rock? But if that's the case, then we should know that death and life are in the power of the tongue. And we shouldn't disbelieve what Scripture tells about our tongues. Nor should we deviate from God's word, by the way. Because here God said, speak, and Moses, you know, hit the rock. That's a deviation from the instructions of God, so that was not right. And you and I can certainly learn a lesson there, that you and I must be careful not to deviate, you know, from the words of God. Look at Psalms 106. Just to continue or finish off the story of Moses, Psalms 106, and we'll read verses 32 to 33. So Psalms 106 recounts the whole story pretty much of Israel being in Egypt as slaves, being delivered through the Red Sea, through the wilderness. We pick up the story here in verse 32, 33. They angered God also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses on account of them, because they rebelled against his spirit, so that he spoke rashly with his lips. Moses spoke rashly with his lips, which don't be hasty, right? It says there, they rebelled against his spirit. My New King James got a capital H, capital S, implying that's God's spirit. I don't think that's right. Most translations say they rebelled against, or they provoked his small h, spirit, small s. So implying that the people provoked Moses' spirit. They drove him off the edge, and momentarily he lost it. You rebels! Must we bring water out for you? And it says there, it went ill for Moses on account of them, because they rebelled against, I think, Moses' spirit, drove him nuts, so that he spoke rashly with his lips. And remember, death and life are in the power of the tongue, so be careful how we use it. You know, that's, of course, Moses under a great deal of pressure, you know, at that time. And when you're under pressure, as you might occasionally be, myself, it's good to press the pause button and count to 100 before, you know, opening the mouth and engage the brain first. So I think it's very important that we remember that, like Proverbs said, we've got to learn to rule the tongue, right? So, I mean, let's watch our words. I think that's very necessary, you know, for us. And there's no reason why we can't do that. I mean, you and I will be speaking words probably over the next today or the next few days, depending on, you know, where you live, who you are. And we should be cautious about our words. You know, we should avoid words which are negative and carping and critical and complaining and running down this and running down that. Very easy to do. That might show something about our hearts, perhaps hearts that lack, you know, gratitude. And we should perhaps endeavour to have words which are a bit more, you know, positive, upbuilding, encouraging. You know, I don't think the Lord Jesus had a vocabulary that was filled with idle words, worthless words, right? So let's watch our words, because one day it says that men will be judged, held to account for their words. By their words will be condemned, by their words will be judged. So you and I don't want to be judged harshly in this life for our words, and we certainly don't want to meet a future judgment where we have a history of very bad words. So in a nutshell, let's all pay attention to our words and watch our words. And with that, we'll conclude today's message.